Live from Derbyshire, this is The Sunday Lunch Show with Brent Poland, and you are listening live.
Sunday Lunch Show with me, Brent Poland, and Spence. And today we're going to discuss, up for debate, this one. There's going to be a lot of discussion, hopefully, about it, whether children have become more violent or whether we're just more aware of it. What type of violence are we talking about? So let's tune in and talk it out with me, Brent and Adam, in the Sunday Lunch Show.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org or join in the conversation by downloading the Podbean app and following Teachers Talk Radio. #TT Radio.
Good afternoon, and I hope you're all well. And me and Brent finally break up for half term.
Yay!
Which is great news. I think watching everyone else break up was heart-wrenching last week. But I'm really glad to break up. I was really actually on my knees towards the end of last week, which is so half term awakens.
Half term is awakened, yes, and of course there are some going back tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've got your sort of dreads of going back, but good luck to you if you are one of those ones going back tomorrow. And those of us like ourselves who are having our half term this week, well, good luck in trying to get a place in Centre Parks or wherever you're going, or whatever break you're having. It's interesting seeing some of my colleagues.
We should do what other people were doing last week. We should post all our holiday photos.
Yeah, well, seeing some of my colleagues, one's gone to Dublin, and as I say, it's the most expensive city in the world because everything's twice the price. Everything's twice the price. You see what I did there? Dublin, twice the price. So, what we're looking at now is this came from a conversation from me ringing in to Midnight Radio, which I tend to do every once in a while. The presenters of a certain national radio station who have got me on quick dial.
Yeah, they know you, don't
they? They know me, yeah. So and they know my topics as well. But I felt obliged because I felt it was being very, very kid bashing and children bashing and kids these days. And as a teacher of a certain vintage, I get very upset when I see young people getting rounded upon. I feel defensive of them. I feel loyal towards them. I feel as if I should stand up for their rights. And I don't like it when I hear the snowflake this or kids these days that. And I think we have to always taper things with a sort of what would you call it, a pinch of salt. So what today's come out of is actually that conversation and the realization that maybe I might be wrong. I don't think I am. I hope I'm not. If I am wrong, then we're in a whole world of trouble, because the question was, it was about youth crime and certain news stories about an old man coming, and he's challenged these young people, and these young people have then gone and stabbed this gentleman. And pretty horrific. And a couple of cases that reached the media of, young hoodlums, when challenged, have reacted and then hit somebody, and you hear these stories all the time, but it also makes me think, well, actually, these stories have always happened. You've always had known that there's, young hoodlums and young people involved in sort of violence. And my take was, I remember a couple of years ago researching into it about the lead petrol theory. That actually society.
Yeah, I didn't know this until you sent it to me earlier on the week.
It's a stunning, amazing hypothesis that actually young people have become less violent. And anecdotally, being a certain vintage teacher of nearly 2 decades, I'd noticed that on the playground there'd been less actual physical fights. And I thought that the world's become more online, more the type of bullying that happens now, the type of aggression that happens now is aggression online, social media, that type of stuff. But then we had a couple of situations where a couple of fights made national media. One particular where the girl had her cornrows pulled out, and that led to a huge furore in a school where adults got involved, and a child as young as 10. And watching that footage back, it's quite brutal to see like a 10-year-old dressed in their tracksuit, pull their tracksuit, trousers up, and then start to basically stamp on somebody's head. It reminded me of a scene of the Hollywood movie American History X with Edward Norton, stamping somebody in the head. It was vicious, I'll be honest. It was hard to watch. And the education secretary was tagged into that. It's like, come on, we have to do something about this. And the school got criticised because they didn't break it up, even though it was 100 yards away from the school. I think the guys in the weekly review discussed that last week in the weekly review. So this has been coming for a while, this idea of what's going on in our schools. Are our schools more violent? Are our children more violent? Is our society more violent? And it's a very broad question, hence why, I felt obliged to defend young people. But am I right?
Well, should we have a little listen to your LBC clip? And then we've got a live Twitter poll up on Twitter at the moment for this show. They're just asking the question, are pupils getting more violent? And then we'll kind of see if we can have that discussion as we go through the show. But let's just hear Brent on LBC.
Post-midnight, Brent in Derby. What do you have to say, my friend?
Hello, my friend.
Hi.
I have a hypothesis about this, and I think, to be honest with you, the vast majority of young people I've come across in my 20-year teaching career are fantastic young people. But don't get me wrong, I've taught individuals who then got on to commit violent crimes. And you can see sometimes the embryonic stages of that when they are younger. But the bulk of young people are absolutely fine. And in fact, statistically speaking, this generation is the most timid generation in existence.
What?
And there's one, yeah, it is, as a whole.
Timid?
That's the thing. Yes, as a whole. Well, they spent most of lockdown. Where did they spend most of lockdown? Indoors. Could you imagine my generation being locked down indoors for a couple of months? Are you joking?
Well, I would take issue with you saying that they're timid now. This lot didn't sound very timid.
Oh, no, seriously. Seriously, I spend all day with them. They are, the majority. Now, this is the thing. The majority of children are. But we do have a hard core. But we always had a hard core. Boarding schools were full.
But did 14 and 15-year-olds stab other 14 and 15-year-olds to death?
Yeah. Violent crime has existed since when? Violent crime has existed.
But not at this age, Brent.
Yes.
Really?
Well, tell me what the Bulgars in the 1990s, what was that? We've always had. This is the thing. With the media now, we report things a lot more. We're aware of things a lot more. It's like everything else.
Did you say the Bulgars? Jamie Bulger?
Yes.
No, but that was a sort of very rare, extraordinarily horrible, violent thing from two young thugs. This is every day.
It's every day in certain areas,
So?
but not the bulk majority of the country. The majority of our young people are not like that. We have, of course, got some individuals who are under the lines of county lines. Yes, there is problematic some areas, but the bulk of our young people are not like this. And in fact, murder rates globally and aggression in young people globally has declined, and they reckon the hypothesis lead in petrol.
All right. Well, tell me whether or not you think, if you see some of these boys behaving like this lot were, should you intervene and tell them off?
I would leave it up to the individual whether they're confident enough to do that. I personally would, because I deal with young people every day, and that's what I've done for a living for the last 20-odd years.
No.
But at the same time, I would always advise somebody, if it's up to them to be confident. Remember, the thing about every young person, and this is the thing you have to understand, is inside every young person there was once a little boy or a little girl, and they are a human being. And if you can reach through them, and I know I'm sounding a bleeding heart liberal here, if you can reach through them, even Adolf Hitler was a mummy's boy.
Oh, come on.
You know, so he was a mummy's boy. So can I read you a quote?
Go on. Just from Mein Kampf, don't tell me.
No.
Okay.
No. The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in places of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of the household. They no longer rise when their elders enter the room. They contradict their parents. They chatter before company. They gobble up the dainties at the table. They cross their legs and tyrannize their teachers. Where did that come from?
Dickens?
Socrates.
Okay. A bit further back. But to be honest with you, crossing your legs and arguing with your parents is a bit different to stabbing a man who's just come out of a toilet. Anyway, look, no, I take the point.
Right, there's a question we were just talking. Is when do you sleep, Brent?
I don't. I'm a 3 or 4 hour a night type of guy. I tend to go to bed quite late. I'm a bit of a I get good quality sleep, so I take that's a show in itself. Is how many hours sleep do you know as a parent? How many hours sleep do you get as well? The context of that, of course, is that I have a good rapport mostly with most of the presenters of other radio shows, and they have me on a dial-up sometimes. Yeah. So, and I like ringing into. One of the reasons why I like doing this is
I like.
I like.
It's on a radio affair. Is that what you do?
Well, Sorry, Adam. I'm not betraying you. All right, my co-radio host. But the thing of it is that I felt that, and I do feel that we sometimes condemn every generation, and people get to a certain age, and even amidst that, as a presenter, was like, maybe he's at my age, and it's like the year 7 children always get it from the year 11 children who look back and go, we weren't like that when we were year 7s. And I do think society sometimes just piles on to young people and criticizes them. So that's what I was trying to do. But the question is, am I wrong? Am I wrong in defending this generation? Are our children becoming more violent? And the more I think about it, the more I may have made an error of a judgment on saying that these children are timid. Or I think that's the wrong choice of word. When I said timid, I probably was trying to say that they're more laid back in ways, and they're less aggressive. I do agree still with my own hypothesis on that. I think as a generation they are less physical. I think that's the point I was trying to get across. They're not as physical. They're not as robust. They're not as and it comes from the fact that I don't think there's as many physical fights in school.
So is that the question you want to test then? Are students more physically violent?
But then that's the question: are they more violent? Because the more I think about this, the more I think actually that I have a different hypothesis now, and I'm formulating. This is why this is going out to debate, and you're more than welcome to ring in, discuss with this, whether you agree or disagree with me, because there are people who will agree with me, and that there are people who will definitely, by their own learned examples, they may disagree with me because they have seen it with their own eyes, or they've felt it. They work in the community. They're a community officer. A police officer may disagree with me because they're at the coalface of what's going on in society. But then I often think the police officers are always called out to the cases that they see a certain part of society, the underbelly and the undercurrent of society that we don't. And again, that was the point I was trying to make: is that if I have 30 children in the class, how many of those children would propose physical violence, would go outside and physically, fight? They're not the type. Whereas in my generation, fighting was normal. It was, you went to the bike sheds. You had to stick up for yourself. Maybe that's my read of it, because of course I came from a more aggressive, violent society, considering the troubles that I grew up in. Maybe I was surrounded by a lot more and more sensitive to it. But you had to be more. Men were men. Men had boys had to fight.
There was definitely a sense of from my elders of if you've been hit yourself, you won't get hit again if you hit them back twice as hard.
But parents would even instill that within you.
But it's certainly mentioned by kind of older people. When you had conversations with uncles and older cousins and
stand up for yourself.
Essentially stand up for yourself. I.e., if you allow them to hit you or they're not scared of you, then they will hit you. Which is kind of, looking back at it now, it seems like a surreal bit of advice.
But then you had parents themselves who were, and you say this instance was smacking the cane at school. I was caned at school. I was one of the last generation to be caned at school. So if I think about, I had my parents who used physical punishments on me. At my school would use physical punishments on me. So violence was something, and I'd look out the window and I'd see army soldiers pointing guns at people. So it seemed that wherever I went, there was somebody who was trying to enforce their will upon me.
So schools were violent places anyway.
Schools were violent places.
Just violent places.
Well, your teacher could put you against the wall and threaten you, and I had that as well.
I mean, there's an incredible section in Chris Evans's autobiography where he talks about not ever going back to school after this incident, of a teacher actually just punched him straight in the stomach. I actually asked him for a question, he couldn't answer it. He just punched him straight in front of the class, just punched him straight in the stomach. He walked home and said to Mum, I'm not going back to that school. And Mum said, fair enough. Yeah. And that was.
And if you asked a certain generation of people, they would have told you that was acceptable. And they're fine with it now. It's the same as the people who want to bring back the cane. But then schools were more violent places. And that was the thing I'm suggesting, is that maybe our children aren't as violent because violence is not being done to them. But then my hypothesis falls on rocky ground when you look at the amount of parents who, the unreported crime of parents being abused and hit by their own children.
Yeah.
And I've had instances where it's been known that, boy turns around and especially boys hitting their mothers. And you've had situations where you can see the parent is afraid of the child.
Yeah.
And is that the case now? And I would extend that now to, it used to be that maybe teachers were the ones in schools who were dishing out the physical force, but now it's the pupils dishing out the physical force to the teachers.
Yeah, there's been a switch,
and that's what we're going to discuss that later on. It seems to be maybe an increase in pupil to teacher violence, whereas 2 generations ago it was
teacher to pupil.
I very rarely see a newspaper saying teacher accused of physically assaulting a pupil.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you regularly see, teacher attacks, teacher attack, teacher attack. Same with
Yeah.
nurses. This has seemed to be a situation where, again, I don't remember accident emergencies having bouncers. And funny, when I was doing some research on this, I came across a security company, a school security company, and it made my alarm bells ring of like, oh my, are we getting like America? Are we getting like America? Or is this perception? Is it now that every act of violence is well documented, that's so well documented it gives you the impression?
Yeah, it's the recording of the instances.
And now every incident is amplified. That school fight that happened with those young girls was absolutely vicious. But 30 years ago, there'd be no record of that.
Yeah,
I mean, I use the analogy of the famous movie Blade Runner. When the android dies, he says that's it. All his memories will die like tears in the rain. So all those things we went through, all of those fights in school 30, 40, 50 years ago, they're all lost.
Yeah.
But when somebody records this violent action, this violent fight, does it amplify, and then do others then say, I saw this.
Yeah.
So for me,
how quickly can you share it? I think the shareability and the viralness of tweets and stuff, YouTube clips.
And then the narrative takes hold of this generation of children. And that's what I was trying to get across. And I don't know if I got it across completely. I went the other way in what the presenter wanted. The presenter was wanting a load of callers to come in and go, yes, these children, I had to go with me on a bus. These children, attacked a dog. And some of the later callers were absolutely, they were along those lines, and they were a litany of, young people did this to me. Young people are no respect. And it was that quote encapsulated the Socrates quote. But I do feel, and I think I might have been wrong in some what I'm going to say, but that's what we're up for discussion. And you're more than welcome to disagree, call in, and we'll be having that big discussion about 20 minutes time. So just after the news. So between now and then, if you want to put a question together, or if you want to call in, or you want to react to our Twitter poll and that, please, by all means, react to that. But you want to have a quick chat about COVID.
Well, yeah, it's just interesting this week as we kind of got ready for half term, is that on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we had to have a reduced population in school because of a massive spike in COVID within the Birmingham area. This was, and this unfortunately kind of hit a lot of my colleagues worked very, very poorly earlier on in the week, and have now luckily kind of got through the worst. Thank goodness they'd all had the jabs, and so obviously the impact of COVID was a lot lessened. But it just kind of goes to show really that it's still going on, and it's still there, and it really impacting schools, although it's kind of not off or not on the main news at all. But it's interesting because I also heard a report about someone talking about long COVID, kind of what's the best way to not get long COVID, and the simple answer was not to get COVID in any sorts is your answer. So, and we still know nationally that COVID still exists, with long COVID cases still being one of the causes for this the reduced amount of people in employment at the moment. But
the actual figures back up what you're saying, because the data from the National Statistics says COVID levels are rising in parts of the UK. Figures show that most age groups in England have seen a jump in prevalence of COVID, with rates highest among secondary school age children.
Yeah.
I recall that children didn't get it and children didn't spread it.
Yeah, I remember your
children never got it and children never spread
That's
it.
Right,
Who knew?
Yeah.
The number of hospital patients in England who have tested positive continue to rise, and 1.2 million people in private households are likely to have COVID-19 in the week from the 7th of February, up 20% from 1 million the previous week. So there's always a lag time between obviously getting the data in. But it seems that there was a rise in COVID, and secondary schools driving it.
It was interesting because just the week before, I'd noticed a few people just wearing masks, and you kind of tune back into it again, and then all of a sudden it's like, and that person's off, and that person's off, and then there's those blanks in the register again, and then that person.
And then it went through your staff.
It went through the staff room really quite badly, and I do actually think that our SLT do deal with it, and they were on it very, very quickly.
Well done them.
They have always been. They're kind of, a lot of the SLT are ex-military. It's very well organised. It always was from day one. With like they like their lines.
So
they like their.
Why do I suddenly feel that they're walking around in hazmat suits?
But They're on Monday. There was an announcement about kind of everyone be careful, and Tuesday it was kind of
Well done then.
yeah. So there was a kind of there was an early warning sign, which is good, which I thought was really
Did they get any
well
pushback from doing that? Did they get much pushback from parents and stuff about it?
I don't believe so, because I think again it was we kept year 11 in, we kept year 9 in.
Yeah.
We don't have 7, 8. So year 10 we're on work. It just happened to be on work experience anyway. So it was mainly the kind of sixth formers that it impacted. Year 11 weren't impacted so much, but we have such a robust system for home learning now.
So COVID then, let's get this straight. COVID disrupted the school learning environment to such an extent that we had to partially close again, which again, when our illustrious leaders in charge will talk about us going off on strike again, it will be, the kids have suffered so much during COVID, and yet they aren't. Is there ventilation systems? Where's the cavalry on this? We're still back to this. Nothing's been done.
Nothing's been done.
No.
Yeah. I mean, we just happen to have a very, very modern building with a very good filtration and ventilation system. However,
so you've got military SLT, you've got modern building.
Yeah.
I mean, duck and cover me. I mean, World War III comes, you're all right, aren't you?
We've got a huge basement as well, concrete style basement.
So
with army mats and all sorts.
Okay, I know where I'm heading.
I think we've actually got a shooting range down there.
Okay, I know where I'm heading.
It's a school. Am I coming to the right place?
It's
a school. But yeah, so I mean, it'd be interesting. So I know you've got a story later on about school buildings. Some schools. In some schools, I've got windows that have been knocked out.
Oh, that's their ventilation.
That's the ventilation.
That's the ventilation system.
So they need to actually.
And you know, we wouldn't have to worry about nuclear bombs because our roof is completely asbestos. So you know, the destruction of mankind would be fine. Our roof would survive.
Yeah.
You know, it would be okay.
Yeah.
And that's what's again that was covered in the fantastic show this morning, the weekly review about the crumbling state of buildings. And that one's been building. That's a slow burning story, that one, because especially asbestos, 60s builds, and the suppression of the report, it seems, about the state of our school structures. And although unions are building a case on that, saying, you know, that all the unions are saying that the situation has reached rock bottom. The post-war, basically, schools built in the 50s and 60s are filled with asbestos and inappropriate building materials. And now there's an awareness. It's like everything else. Once you're aware of something, you've got a duty of care to do about it. And I think what this government has tried to do is a bit of a gaslight of like, what's wrong with these buildings? Nothing wrong with these buildings. No, they contain asbestos. Do they? Yes, they do. Oh, we'll get to report. And they're fudging it. They know very well that there is a lot of school buildings out there that are unsafe. And if you work in one of those buildings, and this is happening, there's going to be class action lawsuits. Erin Brockovich, eat your heart out, where there will be teachers saying, "I'm sorry, but I've got lung problems as a result. I was teaching."
Were these schools that are all built around a certain
50s, 60s builds?
build.
The post-war, and if you look at a lot of housing estates, these are the type of schools that are in the old housing estates that were built in the 50s and 60s, in the post-war era. And they were built again. We've got them because our 60s build. We got a grant of £10,000 to build a new garden. So I secured as part of our eco thing, a kind of community garden. And as soon as we started laying the groundwork for it, we discovered what's this stuff in the ground. Guess what we discovered? The builders just simply over the side of the outside of the building, just dumped it in the ground or put some topsoil over it, and that lay in the ground. So we had to significantly use a lot of that grant money to clean up the area. Because what we going to do? You're going to be growing crops in it. I mean, when you think about that logically, that gave me nightmares. That gave me absolute nightmares. And so
who knows what's buried in the rest of the sites then? If you just happen to dug it up,
exactly,
just because of that chance.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is the thing, and then you added the fact that these are our children we're dealing with. These are buildings for our children. I mean, that is absolutely criminal when you think about it. In the 6th wealthiest country in the world, I mean, there's some schools still teaching in porta cabins.
Yeah.
Oh, come on. We're the 6th wealthiest country in the world, and if the government was clear about levelling up, it's an absolute national disgrace instead of some buildings. But that's that story about that.
So we're building up to another strike on the 1st of March.
1st of March.
It was really interesting because I said to Brent before the show, I've been following a guy on Twitter. And he put a poll up about would you accept stick to the 5%, but have a such a reduction in your workload that would give you basically 1 day per week to clear all of your admin, marking, planning, and the poll that he put up was 75% yes in favour of that, 25% no. So what do you think about that as we go into this?
I think that combines with what I think Tom Rogers did a show on that when he was looking at the unions, talking to the unions, saying is really pay the right. It was pay the right way to go. And I asked Dan Kabidi that question in our interview a couple of weeks ago, which you can listen back on that. We've got the hustings coming up with Daniel and Neve on the 3rd of March, I think. So that's really going to be a really interesting listen. They'll go head to head. They're fighting a really good campaign, the pair of them, at the moment, so it's worth keeping an eye on. And obviously, what are the differences between the two at the moment? Because they are, similar in many aspects, but I do think there are some differences, and obviously that's what we'll be trying to sort of give the NEU membership who listen to this a fair sort of crack of the whip of being able to decipher between the two candidates. And we have had both on at this stage. But that was the thing of, but Daniel's response was we had to go for pay if we had to have a dispute, because that was within the union laws. But they know that. They know it's not just about pay, it's about conditions, about pensions, it's about work safety, it's all of those things. It's workload, it's recruitment, retention. There's a plethora of issues going wrong in education. Send provision. I mean, where do you start? Mental health, teacher mental health. I mean, where do you start with the litany of issues that we have? Crumbling schools, where we have, we need a root and branch when it comes to education. Take the exam system, student mental health. And we're up that season now where we're seeing them, dropping like flies, God bless them, because they're having to cope with an exam system which just doesn't measure their ability, basically ticks the box. So
it doesn't look like anything that's going to stop the strike on the 1st of March. But maybe the two others might be under...
Possibly. The only movement is there's mood music coming out of Whitehall, and they were suggesting that they won't move on pay. But, and this is the interesting thing, they're willing to look at the bureaucracy and the amount of bureaucracy that teachers are doing, which coincides with what you're saying, that they may attack this from a different point of view of, if we reduce the amount of workload you have, we can increase the amount of pay. But you could suggest that is a kind of pay rise. If you're working less hours for the same amount of money, you're kind of... You are getting a sort of pay rise.
I disagree, because I don't think you'll be doing less hours, because essentially you'll just be not doing stuff that's in your own time, essentially.
Yeah, not doing
stuff that's not been paid for.
Well, I mean, how would you? Because the thing about that is your hours are at the discretion of your head teacher, and your head teacher might work for a trust. So this is the thing about the government making promises. Your government can make you promises all they want, but your employer is now not the government any longer. And we saw that during the week with the Sheffield advertising.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, are you oozing with leadership? Are these people oozing with leadership? Are you one of these people? I mean, one of the things that I think you said it. Are they just being honest?
Well, I'll give them credit.
Are they just being? Are they just saying this is a hell of a job?
Have they described half of my job?
Yeah.
Because I'll be honest, I'd say, right, if that's what they want and somebody's willing to work for them like that, then fine. At least then you go into the job with your eyes open and you know what you're getting yourself in for. And maybe that's asking for somebody who's, intrinsically motivated. I've gone for a job interview, and myself and the head teacher of that place both turned around halfway through the interview and said, I don't think you fit in here. And I said, I'm glad you said that, because I don't think I'd fit in here. Interview ended. You've got to fit where you fit. You've got to fit the ethos. You've got to buy into the ethos. And there's nothing worse when you arrive somewhere and you think to yourself, I just don't fit in here.
Yeah.
So I take that in every walk of life. You take that in any other job, and you take that. You footballers like that all the time. Sports people are like that. I've transferred into a club. I don't fit their ethos. And you can, and the thing is, you can change to their ethos.
Yeah.
Or you're not going to change.
I don't think you're going to bend this far. So are you? So that they want somebody who oozes with leadership, leadership within their interactions, to be a great orator. Brent, you're an orator. You can
probably
do
too
that.
much. I get criticised for that.
We want someone who handles authority well.
No.
And is willing to hold the line and lead with bravery, when needed.
I can hold the line all right. Yeah, I'd agree with you.
We don't underestimate the power of vision and direction, and these are irresistible forces able to transform obstacles into new pathways forward. I mean, that sounds like someone's put that into chat. GTP.
Somebody's been sucking on the American corporate speak there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Did they want synergy and blue sky thinking?
Sky thinking. And what was one I had once, which was kind of, we only want to have one of these interviews where you have to walk away. They said we are solution resource centre.
Oh, stop!
Is there any? I think the next question was, is there anything else we can do for you? And I just said, I just want to go. Can I get a taxi? It was just so bizarre. I don't know what they were meaning. Were they just nervous? Were they anxious? Have they just got things out?
But I know this advert has triggered some people into like, oh, come on, this is ridiculous. But I'm tending to go the other way and say, well, they're telling people what they want up front. And if you buy into that, then you don't get to turn around and say halfway into your couple of months into your job, going, you know what you signed yourself up for. And maybe if more schools were more honest with people, that advertisement wouldn't stick out. I mean, if they explicitly say, look, you as assistant head teacher, and it was interesting to say assistant head teacher could sometimes be the roles that people can hide in and everything else. Now, it sounds as if they may have had assistant head teacher who tried to basically blag it. Yeah. And they're basically saying, now, look, this is our school, this is our ethos, this is who we are. And if you're part of our team, you're part of our team. It's full on. I mean, and I think it's too far. I
mean, ooze can work in two ways, can't it? It's not, ooze is not always good.
Yeah.
But it can sound a bit pussy as well. As in a spot.
Oh, got you. You're oozing out. You're oozing charisma. Thanks for that mental image, by the way. I just got a big giant boil being popped. But anyway, that's that one. What else we want to look at? We were looking
at. Have a look at Labour, because
yes, there was a.
It's interesting because we haven't heard a lot from Labour on education policies.
One thing we saw we liked.
Yeah.
And it was getting teachers to sit on new community courts under plans proposed by a future Labour government. I like this. And I'm not a Labour supporter. I'm sure a different political allegiance, but they are considering proposals that can see teachers sitting on new community courts to decide how antisocial behaviour is punished. And I think that's directly connected to what we're talking about. Under the plans, they could decide the types and length of community sentences, which could include making offenders clear litter and vandalism as part of clean-up squads. Like that idea. Drop the litter, pick the litter up. Steve Reid, the Shadow Justice Secretary, outlined the details he intends to say. Let the law-abiding majority take back control of their streets from antisocial behaviour. Holding the line.
Hold the line.
Reid will reveal the community courts, which would include social workers and other leaders, which would meet directly to punishment. That's like, your community court and restorative. I mean, it's restorative justice, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've done the vandalism, you do the crime. It does make me think of that Channel 4 TV show Misfits. They're all dressed up in orange jumpsuits out doing out cleaning the windows. But you do the crime, you do the time. I don't see a problem with that. And maybe those young people, that might teach them the value of things, and learning it. Maybe that's a good thing that teachers might be on there and say, look, you need to learn a lesson. You've gone and vandalized this thing. You go and fix it. Yeah. You take responsibility and ownership. And then again, that's Tom's going to do a really good program on Monday night about this, about where does the parent, teacher, student responsibility thing. If we're making people responsible for the thing they do, I like that from an atonement point of view. I mean, the religious side of me, and I'm a religious person in some aspects, does like the idea of people doing some penance. You do something wrong, you have to pay a consequence, and then you have to genuinely feel as if you've done wrong. You feel sorry for it, you make up for it, you move on, it's forgotten about. I like that cycle. And I think we've lost that in schools. And I think too often now in schools is we punish a child, they do it again. We punish a child, they do it again. We punish a child, they do it again. Where is the learning in the punishment? Where is the learning? Where are you getting any responsibility for their actions whatsoever?
It's a little bit of do not show some kids up, make them humiliate a little bit. I mean, let's be honest. As long as everything's been assessed, properly. I mean, it'd be interesting to know where they come. To me, it smells a little bit of Labour just moving a little bit right, just to try and.
It could be construed. You could construe this as a kind of a justice thing.
Yeah.
But if it's handled correctly, if you're having teachers and social workers in there, I'd say maybe that child doesn't deserve a criminal sentence because. There are mitigating circumstances, but they may be having, that's the difference, maybe having those individuals there, a bit like your what's that tag, team round the child, what do we call that? When you have a meeting, we have a team round a child.
Yeah, the whole mats.
You have the camps. But there's a specific name for it when you've got the psychologist, you've got the social worker, you've got the school, and they all discuss the child, and they all meet around the child. And they literally sort of, and that's when they input in and more knowledge you have of somebody's background sometimes, but having people like social workers and teachers on there who aren't as, say, for instance, cut and dry, we're more nuanced. And that would be a good thing possibly to involve us. But then remember, that would help our profession with a bit of gravitas. However, one massive thing, would you then say, oh, I'm a teacher, I'm on a community court? Would my school release me for that?
Yeah.
We've got a teacher show, but like Rishi Sunak's 18th land. It's a great idea, but
does it become like another form?
I'm sorry, but my primary job is what? And now you want me to be a judge as well?
Yeah.
Well, hello.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a nice idea, but it needs to be funded. It needs to be thought out. And if they're just trying to score points by saying they're a law and order party and trying to basically move on and come up with an idea.
To me, it smells a little bit of that. I'm getting a little waft of that's where they go.
You're getting cynical, you know. Last one on this.
Good eye, mate. Put a shrimp on the barbie.
Well, after watching my favourite TV, what was on here when you came in?
I have no idea. It looked very good. I mean,
what was it? Describe it to me.
Brent has an incredible TV in his living room.
It is, yeah.
I wasn't really paying any attention.
It was a blue dog.
I'm in the zone when I come here.
Yeah, it was a blue dog that was from Australia. So parents know the TV show I'm talking about, and we have Bandit, and we have Bingo, and we have Bluey, and we have Mum's Chili. And it resonates. Anybody whose parents will know what I'm talking about. So I often watch that TV show and think, and I've used to live in the area where it's filmed, even though it's a cartoon, but it's based on Brisbane, mate. And I lived in Australia. For a year. I lived and worked in Australia, Sydney 2000 Olympic Games.
Oh, nice.
Good. So yeah, and Irish people, British people have a very strong connection to Australia. But here's where they're at. Australian politicians are using new trade agreement, Brexit, which is under the Brexit agreement, the new trade agreement. Which was let's not go down that route. But it was one of the trade agreements set up. I think Liz Truss negotiated this one.
That's very well done.
Well, here comes the kicker. Where do we see what
does it involve cheese?
No, cheese and wine. That is a disgrace. So the recruitment of 31,000 people. They're 31,000 short. They have a worker shortage. And they're now, and they've done this for years, haven't they? They're looking to poach our doctors, our teachers, our police officers, our civil engineers. And here's the thing, our GP can earn 82% more in Western Australia. And it's interesting it's Western Australia because it's the most isolated capital city in the world. There's my geography lesson coming in. And you have to drive across the Nullarbor. If you drive across it, I'll tell you, it's 2 days of just mindless, flat, dead carcasses on a road. If anybody's driven across the Nullarbor, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So Western Australia, because of its isolated nature, has obviously got a labour shortage more than anywhere else. So the Western Australian government have put out this call, and they're willing to offer UK primary school teachers 68% more pay, and nurses 58% more. So see that recruitment retention crisis? Well, that's going to get worse because, this is no advertisement for Western Australia. I'm not giving them free advertisement. I'm just reporting what they've said. Western Australian Government Minister Paul Papaitia said it will lead to a delegation to the UK and Ireland as Australian state looks to tackle the labour shortage. And there is a world labour shortage. And you and I were discussing this. Even some of our TT presenters are in this situation. Is how many overseas teachers do we have? And you talked about Qatar, Dubai.
So it seems to be kind of the talk in our staff room is around Qatar. Obviously, a lot of the teachers, not obviously, but a lot of the teachers I work with are Muslim. So they look to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, to those places for lots of reasons. I know one of my colleagues is looking at it from a kind of religious perspective about how they want to bring their child up in a more Muslim environment, and that's perfectly fine. But obviously the money is very good, especially in Qatar at the minute. I think Saudi Arabia has settled down to. It's not the big one that it was.
Well, I used to do an exchange program with the UAE 10 years ago, the Connecting Classrooms project with the British Council, and the majority of their teachers there, of the 6 teachers involved, 5 out of the 6 were Jordanian, Syrian, Egyptian, Palestinian. And what was quite ironic about that was they joked and said, well, out of the 3 schools in the UK, we had a Scotsman, an Irishman, and an English girl. So it was kind of like...
It was like a joke.
Well, that was the whole thing with the British Council, was the people representing Britain were not always from Britain, and the people representing UAE, only one of them was from it. Yeah. So it's kind of like we have an international labour market, and our teachers now willing to travel. And again, I'm sure there's been so many teacher talk radio shows and that. We've got so many presenters who are in Portugal, Spain, and all over. Belgium as well seems to be represented. Because, it's an international recognised qualification, a vocation that travels. So that's what the Australian government is doing, is not going to help us with our recruitment retention. And you see this strike at the moment. I can only see that exacerbating and leading more of an exit, which again goes back to why aren't they doing more to keep us here? Not just looking at pay, but looking at bureaucracy and everything else. And I can't understand their logic, because when you've trained people up, I mean, someone like my wife is a clinical psychologist. How much does it cost to train someone like my wife?
25 grand, 30 grand?
No. Multiply that by a factor of 10.
Okay. 33 or 300,000.
Plus.
Okay.
But how much does it cost to get one teacher? You take us, you get us through 18 years of school, then put us through 3 years of university,
Well,
4 years of university.
Well, just the whole recruitment process costs a school about 2.5, 3 grand, just with the adverts. And,
so you've trained people up from age of 4.
Yeah.
And that's a brain drain.
Yeah.
And that was happening in my country. We had one of the best education systems in the world. And where do you find us? You find us in Australia, New Zealand, Canada. I'm from a society which has, as we often say, our best export is our best asset too, and that's our people.
Yeah.
And that was always happening, but that stopped happening in the Republic of Ireland now. The Republic of Ireland is now a net importer of people. It's actually having problems now with community integration, because they've always been a net exporter.
Yeah.
But now the Republic's one of the third highest quality of living in the world.
Yeah.
They're actually struggling because they're actually calling for people to come back from places like Australia. Because their economy's growing that much. So we're going to have the news now, and when we come back from the news, we're going to have the discussion about whether we believe schools have become more violent, whether kids are more violent, whether society is more violent, but in particular, what do we think about our young people? Am I wrong when I defend them and say that our young people are less violent than in previous generations? Am I wrong when the Twitter poll says out of 180 people that 180 people, 75% of those 180 people said that they believe that our children are more violent? So what do you believe? What do you think? You're more welcome to ring in, more welcome to send us a message, more welcome to ask us a question. Please engage in the debate if you're really up for it. And if not, Adam and I will chew through some of the facts and statistics. What's really interesting is finding the facts and statistics on this is quite difficult, especially post-COVID. There seems to be a lot of stuff about 2019, 2020, and I don't think this has been looked into since. And considering the impact on schools with COVID, I'd go so far as to say this might be deliberate, or it might be somewhere along the line, somebody's producing some research and saying, what is the impact in schools? Because anecdotally, I have seen more aggression in schools the last 2 or 3 years, whereas the couple of years before that, I don't think I had. So there's definitely something switched, and it isn't, I believe, peer-to-peer. There's a lot more now of adults and teachers who are suffering from the physical attacks and stuff. And again, that's my reading. That you may disagree, you may agree. It is one of those debates that I don't think you can ever fully resolve, because there'll always be the philosophical lines drawn on it. But we'll go to the news, and then please ring in, call, or equally give us a view on that.
See you later.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
STV reports that a council in Scotland could become the first to open schools for 4 days per week. According to the report, West Dunbartonshire Council is currently considering the proposals alongside a range of other measures as part of a bid to plug a £15 million funding gap. Currently, primary schools in the county are open to pupils from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. each day, with secondary schools running an asymmetric week with 7 periods on Mondays and Tuesdays and 6 periods daily Wednesday to Friday. The new proposals would see primaries open Monday to Thursday with hours of 8:30 a.m. to 3:45 p.m. and secondary schools running an 8-period day Monday to Thursday, beginning at 8:20 a.m. and ending at 4:10 p.m. The plans were shared with parents and are for the 2023 to 24 academic year. The other proposals being considered for education across the council are a reduction in the number of learning assistants, a review of grants for uniform, removal of breakfast clubs in primary schools and swimming lessons for pupils in primary 4. West Dunbartonshire Council says the plans would have no impact on teaching time or teacher numbers, but that savings would be made in costs for transport and energy usage. It does acknowledge that the proposals may impact upon childcare arrangements for parents, and that consideration must be given to support vulnerable children. Plans for fifth day provision for those children is being explored. The plans are likely to find favour with unions, as during June 2022's AGM for Education Institute Scotland, delegates backed a motion calling for a move to a 4-day week, stating that it could improve the standard of teacher well-being. There is some concern, however, on the possible impact of the sort of move on those with non-teaching roles in schools. The Council will consider proposals during a meeting on March the 1st, 2023, before any further steps to consultation can be taken. The Channel Island of Guernsey has released the finding of its latest Young People survey. The results seem to indicate that vaping in schools is on the rise and that there has been an increase in bullying reports amongst children in Year 8 and Year 10. In better news, 40% of pupils surveyed believe their school now takes bullying seriously, a significant increase in the 26% figure from 2019. There has also been a significant uplift in the numbers of young people who cycle or walk to school, from 26% in the 2016 survey to 40% in 2022. Year 6 pupils walk or cycle the most. In terms of health, 40% of those surveyed admitted to trying vaping, although cigarette usage was down at only 15%. More Year 10 girls vape than Year 10 boys. The survey is completed every 3 years. Finally, Sir David Attenborough has praised Sunderland University's decision to join BAFTA's Albert Education Partnership to teach students the importance of creating sustainable content. Students on Sunderland's MA Media Production programme will benefit from teaching on topics such as the science of climate change, the environmental impact of the film and TV industries, sustainable production practices, and creating content with strategic environmental purpose. Sir David said that saving the planet is now a communications challenge, whilst Gary Stubbs, leader of the MA programme at Sunderland, said the university's film and TV department is set to take green issues to task. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Well, I think that's the news finished.
Yeah, so
we're going to get onto this debate about whether we think school pupils or school-age pupils, I guess, will be the kind of debate, whether they have become more violent, or is it something we're just noticing more of? We'd like to get your thoughts on this, really, because we want to kind of keep it a debate if possible, because we're not sure. We've debated it over the week and we've kind of come in and out of yes and no. The poll that we've got on Twitter at the moment has 181 votes with 2 hours left, so please feel free to vote on that. It's currently that 75.7% of you think that, yes, students are getting more violent. But it's one of those things that we were discussing earlier, Brent, is it more subjective than that? Is it dependent on how you judge violence, what you experience as violence before? And we also talked about that kind of potential of there's a bit of a gender divide here on how you react to violence and what you consider.
I would go so far as a cultural divide as well.
Yeah.
I mean, what I consider to be violent might be someone else to consider to be violent. And I've had this recently a lot about shouting, for instance.
Yeah.
What I would consider a shout. Now, I was on the sidelines watching my Year 8s play, and they were 4-1 up, cruising at 4-1 up, and the opposition weren't used to. They had a nice 4G pitch. It's a cup game, and they're used to a nice 4G pitch. And all of a sudden, by half-time, they changed their tactics into our terribly 1960s build pitch, which is horrible, and clay soil as well. I digress. But anyway, they came back and they won 7-5 in the end. And our kids just couldn't cope with their new game strategy. And at the sidelines, of course, I'm terrible. I'm an armchair manager.
Yeah.
And as I'm not even manager of the team, but they're my year eights. I'm a year eight shooter. And I was shouting encouragement, good tackle, well done. But of course, my voice carries like basically, Ian Paisley on a bad day. And some of my colleagues were going like, "Are you like, is that your level?" I went, "That's my normal level of shouting." Oh, right. So when you're shouting at a child, I said, "I'm not shouting at a child. I'm raising my voice. That's me raising my voice. That's me shouting." Oh, okay. So there's another level. There is another level. Because even my own daughter says, "Daddy, are you shouting?" Me? I'm going, "No, I've just raised my voice." But again, it's like what somebody would consider to be somebody shouting is somebody else going, "I'm not shouting. That's not shouting. What are you on about?" And I find that a lot recently that even when it comes to things like, what we consider to be aggressive behavior might be somebody's norm. I think it comes down to what you're considering to be normal. What do you classify as violence? Is it what somebody threatens to do, what somebody physically does, what somebody mentally does? And I think, again, you're right. I think it's very much up to the individual to say that person is being violent towards me. And as a union rep, I sometimes have to wade through, a staff member who says, "Look, I think this child's been violent towards me," and unpick it. And I go, "Okay, well, what was the violence towards you? Oh, they said this thing to me. Okay, was that violence though? Or were they threatening you?" And again, it's down to the individual person's perception of what they deem to be violent, and that means what their social norm is. So psychologists would have a field day with this, and I think this is the problem when you're dealing with education. You're dealing with 9 million children, 1 million adults, and what is the sort of standard, sort of classification of violence in society? And that's what comes down to recording. I do think we are recording things a lot better than we used to. Do I think that children are more violent on whole? I don't think they are. I really genuinely think the majority of our young people, I still stand behind that hypothesis, the bulk majority of our young people, and I would say the same about behaviour, the bulk majority of our young people are not badly behaved. I do think that the minority have become more aggressive. There is a definite hardcore minority. And I think as well, there is a definite, the worst have got worse, is what I'm trying to say. I think the worst have got a lot worse.
So the extremities are.
And I think there's a skewing in some areas. This is definitely a bigger problem than other areas. I do think it's connected to poverty. I think it's connected to families, family dynamics. It's connected to society's issues. It's connected to the internet. I think there's a lot of this needs unpicking. And I don't think there is one organisation out there who's actually tasked at the moment with dealing with it.
Yeah.
I think there is the social workers are dealing with their end, teachers are dealing with their end, police are dealing with their end. And I don't think there's one overarching organisation which is asking that question: what is going on with our young people?
Okay, so should we have a look at some of the data that's out there? So YouGov did some research on the June the 15th, 2022. And the headline was that 1 in 7 secondary school teachers say they face violence from pupils at least once a month. Teachers in Britain say disruptive and violent pupils are ruining their lives, causing physical injury and career-ending psychological harm. So again, there's two sides of this, isn't there? There's the physical and there's the mental. Maybe we want to kind of like take them as a separate instance. Should we just focus on the physical? Because I know earlier you were talking about an incident in the corridor that you had.
Yeah, I had a student who, want of a better word, old-fashioned, squared up to me. And I stood my ground, held the line, and another colleague witnessed this, and I was as calm as they come. I told them to go to the back of the line. They looked at me as if, who are you talking to? And I looked at them as if, "I'm talking to you." And I was no more aggressive than somebody just giving out a set of instructions and somebody broken the rules, applying what the rules were. And the student came over to me, and I stood my ground. And in layman's terms, they drove the shoulder into me. Now, I'm 13 and a half stone. I play rugby. I work out. And Newton's equal and opposite force meant that this young man, who's probably, not exactly at the prime of his testosterone youth, hurt himself against my shoulder. Now, I didn't move. And in fact, my reaction was one of, "What are you doing?" And I was instantly kind of like shocked of like, did you really do that double take of, did you just do that?
Yeah.
And I'm like, rubbing my shoulder a little bit, going like, did you just, what?
Yeah.
And it wasn't like instantly, like, oh God, I've been assaulted. I didn't go down like Neymar, like an Italian footballer. I didn't do the Italian footballer, you know what I mean, rolling around holding my face. No, he had physically invaded my space.
Yeah.
You could classify that as assault, you know what I mean?
Well, you could. Well, you have been.
Well, I don't feel as if I have been personally,
but does it matter if you have or not? It's just the act itself.
Oh, his intention was to try and intimidate me using his physicality, which was in itself kind of funny because there was no threat whatsoever to me whatsoever, because that type of thing wouldn't really impact upon me more. Now, instantly afterwards, I made sure I looked around, and one of my colleagues was more upset than me. Went, what? And my reaction to him was, I want you to go sit down there and we'll deal with this. And it was dealt with. But my other reaction was afterwards, what happens if he had done that to one of my other colleagues who, say for instance, wouldn't have had the robustness of me? I mean, I play contact sports. I've had, throughout my life, so many physical altercations anyway. So I'm not saying that I'm immune to it. Don't get me wrong. It did impact upon me afterwards, but it was more about the fact that he felt he could do this. And the fact that he felt that he could get away with it, or the fact that he tried to flip it, by the way, that was the other thing. Yeah. He tried to flip this, that I had actually gone into his personal space. And I was glad that there was a witness there. And that made me think about the risk of, well, he could have flipped this. And I could have then been facing a charge. And that's where afterwards, I wasn't so much about the physical altercation. I was more worried about the implications for my reputation, implications for myself, but also the fact, implications for my colleagues, that this had become a bit of a norm, that this student would even think of this action, that this came out of what? That I challenged him perfectly within my right in a calm way. And that's what sort of upset me was more, I wouldn't mind if I'd walked up to him like an old school Grange Hill teacher and went, you boy, like Mr. Bronson. Yeah. There was no justification for his aggression towards me, but his default was to try and challenge somebody, and almost in a plucky way. I thought, where's that? And again, I'm actually shooting my own argument in the foot. It's never happened to me in my 19 years in education. It never happened to me whatsoever. It's never come close that far. I've had students verbally, I've had students threaten each other, but never physically have I had somebody come that close to me to actually try and physically intimidate me and physically try and bully me.
Yeah.
And it was dealt with, but don't get me wrong, that has happened to me. So am I a statistic with it? But does that go down as an assault?
Well, I guess so. I mean, interesting. Schools Week back in 2019. I mean, Brent was absolutely right earlier that there is a big void of good data on this since the pandemic. Which again, you could argue is that worrying in itself, or is it just that nobody's doing it, or I mean, I don't know what
whose responsibility would it be?
Whose responsibility is it to log this data?
But exactly, if the Department of Education turned and said there are X amount of attacks on teachers and this is what's going on in schools, then they have a duty, the same as the crumbling schools. They've got a duty to do something about it.
Yeah.
So are they not looking about it? We've seen this, same as with COVID. Hide, deny. Yeah. And what these statistics in 2019 are, they were quite damning. I remember them coming out.
72% is the increase in assaults on school premises. Obviously, unions correctly say it's very worrying. One head teacher in Durham told Schools Week he'd seen a rise in rudeness and lack of tolerance towards staff. The latest figures from 15 English police forces to respond to the Freedom of Information request shows there's a steady increase in assaults since 2015. In 2015, there were 4,089 reports, and that rose up to 7,020 in 2018. The date at the end of July 2019 was that it already got to 4,354 as the report went out.
That's pre-pandemic.
I get it at that point. That's when kind of COVID kind of started to kind of set in.
So who knows what has been?
Yeah.
And anecdotally, all the evidence in schools points to an increase in exclusions and in violence in schools and in lack of boundaries and blurring of the lines. which would indicate that my hypothesis is going out the window. That maybe in the last couple of years there's been a marked, sharp increase in violence in schools. I still don't see it. I still think there are blurred lines in the sense that there aren't the school fights. There isn't that fight. There isn't that culture. That's the word I'm looking for. There isn't that culture in school now of people turning around and saying, "You and me, back of the bike shed, 3:00, bring your friends." And that was the norm when I was at school. Or somebody go down the corner, somebody would, give me your lunch money, or else I'll punch your face in.
Yeah.
No, you get your face punched in and you punch back. End of fight, job done. It's done and dusted.
Obviously, a lot of the data we're looking at there is teacher on pupil on teacher.
People on teacher.
Yeah. However, do we know anything about kind of pupil to pupil? I mean, anecdotally, again.
But that would be the exclusions, wouldn't it? But the exclusions have hit epidemic proportions. But also, this has hit epidemic proportions. There's 100,000 children who are currently not in education.
Yeah.
So where are they and what they're doing and who are they? And interesting, if you go to Glasgow and I know this is it's opening a can of worms about exclusions, but the evidence from Glasgow, and this is why I think the government's trying to stop exclusions. I think they know that if you exclude children, there isn't that wraparound care out there. Yeah. At least if you have children in schools, you saw this during COVID, at least you know where they are.
Yeah.
Which then puts the burden on us to cope with these children. Who maybe we're not helping them, keeping them in schools, and equally they're not safe in schools. And therefore, well, who has these children? Who's dealing with them? And I think they fall through the cracks. And then there's your county lines. And what showed in Glasgow was when they cut down in 81%, I think they cut down in exclusions over a course of time. The amount of violent crime in the area would decrease by 49%. So they drew a correlation between the school exclusions and crime and violence in the community. Therefore, ergo, but then would they then correspond with what was the situation happening in Glasgow schools? Because when you put those students back into schools, were you then going to see an increase in violence in schools? Either way, punishing these people doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
And I come from the bleeding heart liberal humanitarian point of view of trying to figure out why young people commit violence. One school of thought is they commit violence because they come from violent backgrounds. Yeah. I would agree with that because as a child growing up, I grew up in a violent society, and yes, I'm not going to deny you that I got suspended from school for fighting. That doesn't make me a violent person. That means that I was being bullied and I reacted in a way that everybody else at that time reacted, which was, if I was teaching my child to react now, my child wouldn't be dealing now with the school that I went through, which was almost, and my parents' response was, as you said earlier on, stand up for yourself.
Yeah. So
I was encouraged in society to be, and I hate saying the toxic masculinity thing, be a man, stand up for yourself. And that was the norm thing then, wasn't it?
Of course.
You solved your problems by going behind the bike shed. Yeah. And if you even look at the culture of that time, violent schools, I think, were more violent places. The teachers were basically hitting the children.
Yeah.
The children were hitting each other.
It's learned behaviour then, isn't it?
Of
how people in authority are assaulting other people. So therefore, when I get to a place where, for me to be, have authority within my group of people, I need to be aggressive. I need to be violent, and that's
the policing then was.
Yeah.
If you actually think about policing then was, now this is where society splits into two, because there are people who like to go back to that and say, your police should, like these environmental protesters, just go back them across the back of the head, lift them off the street, and that's, I think, the philosophical way that two groups of people see this world. We must physically hurt people, or we must physically intimidate them. We must have the deterrent. The deterrent is important. They seem to believe that, if you have, it's a death penalty thing. If you have the death penalty, if you've got strict rules, if you have strict punishments, and it goes back to the cane will teach this. They're the type that come out, and they actually, the guy doing that debate online said that, and he says, it's not going to be long before we get somebody talking about bring back national service. And then you get, young people should be afraid of authority. That's the thing. And I remember doing an assembly on that in 2004. And this one got me into trouble because it was Michael Howard, and Michael Howard was the conservative leader at the time. I'll never forget the news story because it absolutely triggered me. And it was like, young people should fear the police. And I got on stage back in my early years. I had no filter whatsoever, still haven't. And I says, young people shouldn't fear the police. And I had this quote going like, fear the police. You shouldn't fear authority.
Yeah.
If I have to impose my will upon somebody, by intimidating them. What does that make me?
Yeah.
That makes me a bully. But I think the interesting thing is we teachers know this, and we don't impose our authority now on children.
Try not to.
But it does seem, and this sounds weird to say, it does seem now we're the victims of the violence.
Yeah.
It does seem that some parents are the ones at home being, instead of 2 generations ago, the parent would discipline physically the child. It sounds as if some children now are violently aggressive, bullying their parents.
Yeah.
So we have children bullying their parents, we've got children bullying their teachers, and then you've got teachers like myself who have to restrain ourselves, and I'm happy to do so. But then the question comes, is what lesson are we teaching?
Well, it certainly seems that it's not justified to be more violent to squash the violence of the pupils. It was really interesting because something that I'd not even heard of that you put me into contact with earlier on in the week was this
the lead petrol,
the environmental kind of causation.
Well,
about
air pollution.
How that could air pollution
causes more violence.
Yeah,
I tell you what also causes it: weather. Breezy days.
Yeah.
There's a wind in California called the Santa Ana. And the Santa Ana is a dry wind that comes off the Sierra Nevada mountains. Geography lesson here. Yeah. And when that Santa Ana wind blows, murder rates in LA go up by 1/3. Brisbane, we talked about earlier on, they call it going tropo. When they have got the tropical cyclones, whatever the weather does, it actually interferes with the brain, and it sends people a bit wappy. Yeah. They actually have a nickname for it in Australia, it's called it going tropo. Yeah. The people get a little bit wound up when the hot weather comes, and the hot sticky weather comes. So in the environment, and I think the school physical environment, I was having this conversation, funny with my head teacher about where school is built for 300-400, but we have 700 in. What does that happen when you have the corridors jam-packed? What does it happen when you've got 33 kids instead of a classroom instead of 26, 27? If schools are becoming slightly more aggressive, is it because of the environmental conditions? Is it because of the way that we're teaching? Is it because of the lack of SEND provision? Is it because of the lack of staff? Is it all these little... And I use the David Brailsford. Do you ever hear of David Brailsford? He's he was a British trainer in the 2012 Olympics. He's actually from the area very close to where we are now. And he was the one who came up with marginal gains. And his theory was, if you do marginal things, like you go off on a track meet and you bring your own pillow with you, and you bring your own pillow, you get a better night's sleep. Yeah. What food did you eat? And he was talking about changing the wheel of the bicycle. And he was nudging out every little thing was perfect. The British team won so many medals because they had everything, where they slept, how they ate, their training regime, the time they got out of bed, everything was so perfect. Yeah. That they reckoned they could eke out more times. And some other teams were accusing the British team, the cycling team, of cheating, and it wasn't. It was just that he had eked out. And I think that's what's wrong with schools, is we're not set up. We've got hungry kids, we've got kids coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, we're all piling together, we've got staff shortages, we've got buildings not fit for purpose, we've got corridors which are cramped and out of date, we've got technology that doesn't work, you've got teachers who are having to do bureaucratic nonsense, they're up to all hours in the morning. So what does that lead to? Stress.
Yeah, so you're saying the stress put on the system, the old-fashioned engineering stress, of it's literally, there's too much weight on it. I mean, that's how engineers would talk about stress.
And people snap.
Everything's bending, yeah. So literally the breaking point of violence that we see for lots of reasons. We saw with the Tottenham riots, so whatever, there becomes a tipping point.
It becomes one thing that breaks the straw, that breaks the camel's back.
So are schools in that position, do you think, with overcrowding?
I think they are. Yeah. I think we are dealing with stress more, and I think that stress comes out in the low level type of stuff that we're talking about. I do think the high level stuff doesn't happen. I think culturally now, I don't think our children resolve their problems the same way that we would have resolved our problems. I think they're culturally less violent. I think we've trained them not to be, even from an early age. Yeah. Most parents now turn around children and say, my child hits my other child. They get a lesson. You don't hit your sister. Yeah. Behind my parents' backs, my brother and I. Oh my word, my brother and I. My cousin and I never forget my cousin used to think he was a ninja. He was watching those ninja movies in the 1980s. And he once turned around to me and he was like, no retreat, no surrender. I'm thinking, you're not Chuck Norris, would you stop? Yeah. But that's how we were,
because there was always that theory with human boys, wasn't it? The best thing for them would be to go to a boxing club. And go somewhere to be violent.
Get the energy out of it. Get that. And you see a lot of schools now, they're cutting down on the amount of play, the amount of PE, the amount of times they can actually get that energy out. I will tell you, one of the best things for my mental health was, and it's still, Friday night football. I go on a football pitch and I get rid of all my excess energy and everything else. But lead petrol, here's the interesting one. What did you discover after I put you on this thing?
Well, I was looking at the data I was looking at a Forbes magazine, particularly article about it. Sorry, I've just literally just closed it down to it. But I just posted it up on Twitter for anyone who wants to kind of have a look at this. I mean, the article is over 10 years old, but the graph and the data show that at the peak of lead poisoning in the 1960s, early 70s, violent crimes per 100,000 people were at its peak as well. So literally the two graphs are almost completely correlated with each other. So it's the gas lead in tons versus violent crimes per 100 people are almost identically correlated. The only thing I would say with this is that the gas lead per tons has completely nosedived, and violent crime hasn't completely gone.
No,
it's kind of tailed off at around kind of the 0.9 zone. So it hasn't gone all the way down to the 0.2 gas. So violence still exists. So it can't account for all of violence.
No, but there's a strong. A mathematician would say there's a strong positive correlation between lead in the atmosphere and also the amount of violent crime. What's also interesting about it is that lead has a very strong impact upon children's brain development and levels of aggression. And otherwise, in other words, children exposed to lead poisoning are more likely to be violent and aggressive.
Yeah.
And that hypothesis is well founded. Yeah. And of course, that's lead poisoning as well. But you've also got things like air pollution. It's well documented that air pollution causes more aggression and more violence because the chemicals in that.
So that would be like, for example, that School Week report showed that assaults on teachers, for example, from pupils are much higher in large urban centres such as they quoted Manchester. But I don't know if they didn't have the data for Birmingham.
But then, if you said to me, are you more likely to get teacher assaults in a leafy suburb, in a middle class area in the leafy suburbs of the shires? Are you more likely to have that in urban inner city, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, where you have more crime? Do you think that might be connected more to the crime, the social statistics, the deprivation, the air pollution? Yeah. There's so many different, and this is where your researchers at the places like universities should be unpicking all this, because I think these are the hidden costs in society. I think these are the hidden costs in school, and again linked to the likes of diet. You talk about diet, you talk about nutrition, because I think that affects people's behaviour.
Yeah,
child coming in with no breakfast and they're tanked up on some energy drink. They're more likely to have, more likely to flip if they're not. I mean, you talk about sleep patterns. People who don't sleep are more likely, and our kids are zombies at the moment because of technology. You talk about the fact that, and here's the difference, is that they don't have downtime like we had downtime, or switch off time, because they're wired into the technology. They're getting this constant stream. So my thing is, if people are telling me that children are more violent, I have to ask the question, what is creating that violence? Because it's not lead petrol any longer. So if that is the case, and that we have more violence increasing in schools, and schools are more violent places, and I don't think they are, but I do agree, I think there is definitely more violence against adults from children. I definitely think there is definitely more teachers citing the case of either being verbally assaulted, physically threatened. I've got colleagues who've been threatened in their own homes. Yeah. And that seems to be happening a lot more, and that's parents as well. I think the profession itself, and again it comes down with maybe the profession in the past never got this grief because we got, and this is an interesting hypothesis, we got respect to the fact that we were feared. Yeah. I feared my head teacher. I did what I was told from my head teacher because I feared him. And I often get a bit mortified when my year 7s turn around and they get to year 11 and they go, "You're quite softly, sir." And I went, "Of course I am. But we were scared of you in year 7. And I'm like, why? And I try and work that out. I'm no different all the way through. I don't change. I don't go hard in year 7, go easy in year 11. I'm still the same person. But what it is because they're not used to a male teacher. Yeah. Because at primary,
culture shock, definitely.
There's a culture shock, and I'm a little louder and a little bit more military in some of my behaviourism, because I do adopt a little bit of B.F. Skinner's behaviourism. I am a slant type teacher, not completely. I am a tuck your shirt in. I do micromanage the children I'm quite firm with them. I wouldn't say I'm quite firm, which sometimes has led some of my colleagues to then say, "Ooh, you're a bit sort of old school with them." Yeah, I am. But I don't go up to kids and say, if you do that again, you and me, Sonny Jim, you know what I mean? I'm not the way that the teachers were with me when I was a child. But if you are disarming, if you're questioning something like musical good behaviour management, and I've had pushback sometimes, I will get pushback. But is that what's happening? That some teachers are pushed back that far, that the children feel so emblazoned and so emboldened that they can physically intimidate us. And what can we respond with? Oh, I'll give you detention. Who cares? You see what I'm saying? Have we become...
Detention's an interesting one, aren't they? I'm not sure whether... What do you think about detention generally as a behaviour tool?
Doesn't solve the problem.
Doesn't solve the problem. So,
no, of course it doesn't. Not when they're laughing, going, so what? So I can fall asleep for 20 minutes. I get some kids who love detention. You know why? Do you know why they love detention? They fall asleep for half an hour and they're knackered because they're up all night.
Yeah, and also, there's also those kids that just don't want to go home, so they use detention as just a way of staying in school. As well,
and then meeting their mates after the detention, so it's all a bit of a joke to them.
Yeah, well, I remember that in my previous school where they did this whole school in the hall detention, and it just became like a bit of a joke.
Well, most parents will tell you
it was like a social thing.
You want to punish the child? I get the parents evening, and I'll joke with the parents, and I know they're trying to do the best job possible. Says, well, maybe get some revision done for their GCSEs. Where's the Xbox box controller at the moment? And the parents like, the 3 Xbox controllers are already in my back of my car. He says, why 3? He says, well, we've got to 3 because he got one, he went and sneaked off and got another one, and he went and sneaked off and got another one. So there's a game of cat and mouse going on with this kid and the parent. But I can't blame the parent. The parent's at the point now where they basically keep confiscating the child because they know the punishment has to be something that really affects the child. So their headphones have been confiscated, their Xbox controllers. This is a 15-year-old boy. But what's to stop that 15? Here's the thing. What's to stop that 15-year-old boy going, hey, Mum, give me those Xbox controllers, or else.
Yeah. Which leads us on nicely.
Do you know the Andrew Tate stuff and all that kind of stuff and the online stuff? Is there a lot more of that going on where children are encouraged? You know, and you're hearing that a lot more, and that is a story I want to share with you, which actually scares the life out of me a little bit.
So I just wanted to bring in one thing there while we're talking about kind of video games and consoles. You mentioned the Jimmy Borgia case on your LBC call, and obviously when I was growing up, that was the big thing. Was that the video nasties are causing young children to be more violent. Where do you think we are with that debate at the moment with the video game industry and home movies and that type of thing? Do you think that still is a link that obviously there was a big lockdown afterwards with making sure video games had the right certificates on them, and obviously the wider public was much more aware of video games generally. I think certainly the 80s they kind of snuck in, and my parents wouldn't have known about video games and Terminator 2.
Well, the thing is, as I was saying to you, you know, my cousin was fascinated by martial arts, and there was a whole lot of, and everybody was out doing, you know, everybody thought they were Daniel LaRusso, you know, Cobra Kai back in the 80s. I mean, there's the old back in the 80s thing. But the 80s had, when you look at the movies of the 80s, the Arnold Schwarzeneggers, the Predators, the Terminators, the Die Hards, we were in more of a gratuitous violence, sort of like, violence was fine. And you look at the standards of the time, the gore. You look at the movies that were quite gory, your Freddy Krueger stuff and stuff like that. But we as kids would try and sneak a watch of that. You know, we were always, you know, trying to sort of like, quite innocently, you know, 18 movies were snuck around the school. Yeah. So we had one kid in particular, Barry, and Barry was like our unofficial kind of recorder of everything that was dodgy, you know what I mean? So Barry would be like, yo, Barry, we got a videotape of that, yeah, and literally he'd be like, whatever you wanted, whatever movie you want to watch. But we were told our generation was being corrupted by violent rock music, Iron Maiden, Megadeth, Metallica, and you look at all the stuff of the covers of that, it's quite satanic, it's quite dark and everything else. But that was the thing, is that that's why I use the Socrates quote, because my generation was supposed to be corrupted by, you know, violent, aggressive music, rock music, and of course then massively corrupted by these video nasties and these horror movies. And then when computer game consoles came in, it was then, you know, that switched into the computer game consoles. And I always remember, for instance, America's a big problem with this, about, you know, the Marilyn Manson was the trigger for the violent attacks in America. And I think there are societies in a different place. And I've got this news story completely blows out of the water my assertion that our children aren't violent, because I don't think they are. But this completely, you know, takes my hypothesis and puts it in a blender. So police suggest they have prevented school massacres, reveals Dukes. Matt Dukes, the head of counter-terrorism policing, says that school massacre plots inspired by US rampages have been repeatedly prevented by British police in recent years. Right. The UK's most senior counter-terrorism officer warned that investigators were finding an increased amount of material glorifying school shootings shared by young people online in the UK. Speaking at Scotland Yard at the briefing, he said the UK is facing threats and that the hundreds of reports about potential school attacks have been made to the police terrorist hotline, which he said was driven by the visibility of the attacks in the US. In other words, is it only a matter of time before we have a a kind of Columbine school massacre in the UK? I mean, there was one recently, wasn't it? There was a five-year-old in America that held a teacher at gunpoint, I think. And again, you could sort of surmise: is society becoming more aggressive? Is society becoming more violent? Are our children more violent? What's fueling that? Is it the youth? And again, he may have a very valid point. The LBC presenter when he said this young, he said, Brent, and I'll concede that point, but I didn't concede then. Maybe this is happening to some more younger children. But why is that? Is that because of the parenting? Is that because of society? Is it because of the internet? Is it because of the technology? Is it because of people targeting these children, using them? And I don't know the answer to the question, because I still maintain that our children are less violent as a whole, but the worst cases are shocking. And when you hear that, you sort of say to yourself, this is one of the reasons why we potentially do lockdowns, don't we? Schools now do lockdowns like they do fire drills. And in those lockdowns, it's interesting, you get the windows closed, and be interesting to see how often that happens around the country. But why do schools do lockdowns? Do we do lockdowns in the prevention of, is that coming from people like this, who are basically saying to us, we have credible intelligence that there could be potentially someday a child walking around the corridors of a British school trying to do an assault on other pupils.
Yeah.
And is that only a matter? I mean, when that happens now, and I hate saying this, when that happens now, then will society turn around and go, "What's happening?" Will we then go, will we then go, "That's it"?
Yeah.
We now have to take in these measures. Because here's the irony of this: I grew up with terrorism, surrounded by it, with my windows coming in during a terrorist attack, and yet we didn't do drills. And I do think we do have a lot more sensitivity and a lot more publicity of things like this, which can amplify and create that narrative which children are more violent. Or am I wrong? Are they more violent? And I don't think I don't think we can ever resolve this hypothesis.
It's very challenging. I think all you can do is just present the evidence. I think kind of our plea to the DFE today really is, can we have some data? It would be really good to get some current data, peer on peer, of what is going on in schools at the moment in terms of violence. Because otherwise, in the void of any data, people start speculating.
But how can they do policy?
Yeah.
How can they solve a problem that they don't admit exists? And then how can you then?
We don't know there's a problem. They do that. I mean, this is the point.
Is there a problem? There is.
Well, anecdotally from asking staff, but again, as we've discussed today, it's very difficult to get a handle on what is classified as assault. So that needs to be worked out first, isn't it? How do we categorise? Because none of those reports categorise assaults.
But the thing they always do is, and this is what I get upset about, they seem to think the young people need educate. What's the school teaching them? What's the school teaching them? What's the school teaching them? And they seem to think, let's put all these kids in school and we'll somehow wave a magic wand.
Yeah.
I'm not blowing my own trumpet. I can deliver a very emotive lesson on the Holocaust, where I did this week, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, I cried. It's very emotionally draining, and some of the students cried with me when I delivered a really highly powerful lesson on the Holocaust. And I poured a lot of emotion into it. And they walked out, and every one of them walked out, thanks, sir. And they got it. Now I can deliver that lesson and know, and I have had this situation for the last 18 years, and know that within a couple of years, one of those students who walked away and walked out of there, got that message, was back in the society, and is there with Combat 18. What do I do with that?
Yeah.
Do I say I failed? We schools cannot be society's dumping ground. We cannot keep absorbing the problems as if we made the magic wand and the government solution is the prevent strategy, for instance. Or we'll do a prevent strategy in schools. What do they want us to do? They want us to socially change the conditions. They want us to be social workers. We cannot keep doing this in isolation. We need society's problems to be resolved. We need schools to be part of the problem, but the government keep basically not admitting there's a problem. We have children in our society falling through the cracks. There are some who I believe have mental health problems, and some of those violent attacks might be driven because those children's needs are not met. And if those children's needs are not met, then what happens is NHS is not meeting their needs because they're under pressure because of what is happening to them. That child comes into school not getting their CAMHS appointment. And as a result of that, they have a situation with a member of staff which causes the member of staff so much grief. Now you have the member of staff going off. What I'm saying to you, there's a causality and a knock-on effect where we are taking a hit within education. And then society turns to us and says, oh, these children these days, you think, well, we're not helping them, are we? We're just patching them up. Yeah. We're patching them up and putting them back out there and then condemning them. But we're not resolving the problem. And if those people out there think that National Service or battering children will solve the problem, they're living under a false assumption because that will create a different set of problems. Yeah. And that's not resolved. So again, bleeding heart liberal, social scientist in me wants to understand what's going on, but I'd like the people in charge to be having this discussion and sitting down with people like you and me, sitting down with social service, sitting down with the police, sitting down with all of those, the same we would a team around a child, sitting down around all our children and saying, what is going wrong in our society with our children? Where is safeguarding? Because they keep talking about how important safeguarding actually is. But I think...
Of course, because that's what parents want to hear, isn't it? You want to hear, as you walk into school now, straight away you see who the safeguarding team is as you work in the...
And they have never worked so hard. Yeah. They're overloaded. Yeah. I mean, our safeguarding team are so overloaded. I cannot fault the job that they're doing, and it's such a horrible job they have to do sometimes. And that's the problem, is I think a lot of our children are vulnerable out there and are being picked up by people who want to manipulate them. And that's society failing them. And then when they commit a crime, they're condemned. And yes, people should be punished for the consequences of their actions. I do think that there has to be consequences. Difference between punishing people as a prevention. And I don't think that works. Punishing people after the event doesn't work. Try and stop the event. It's the same as classroom management.
Yeah, preventative rather.
If you create your classroom culture and classroom climate as such, you don't need and you shouldn't need to punish a child because you've got a good working relationship with the children, and there are clear boundaries and there are clear consequences. So it's the same as everything else, isn't it? If society has clear boundaries, if society has clear rules, and I think it hasn't helped the last couple of years, the people in charge themselves have been saying to us, you follow the rules, we don't follow the rules. And I do feel really sorry for the likes of the police at the moment because they're getting it everywhere. Yeah. Do you mean there's a bunch of people out there who want the police to go in heavy-handed, and there's now a bunch of people out there who want the police to sit down and talk to people? I think they're pulled between the rock and a hard place. And again, that needs to be discussed about what kind of measures does society tolerate? Do we want to go back to a time where the only way that children will behave is that we literally threaten them into behaving, and therefore telling them the message that the only way to behave is the threat of physical violence? Yeah. Is that really, as a society, where we go to and say, that's the only thing that works? If that's the only thing that works, then we have to be prepared for all the problems that creates.
True.
But
Yeah. Well, as we come to the end of the show, we've got a couple of minutes left. I think it was a big ask to try and get to the end of it. The poll is now 76%, 24%. So that's our kind of anecdotal our anecdotal poll today. But again, thank you very much for tuning in today. This show has been brought to you in partnership with John Catt Education, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines, specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out. And you can do that by going to John Catt's bookshop to explore a full range of titles, advance your own professional development today. Some cracking titles on there, including Toxic Schools. So this links in nicely with what we're doing today. Obviously, my afternoon is already booked out applying to be assistant head at a school in Sheffield.
Do you have the enthusiasm?
I'm oozing ready. How to avoid them and how to leave them. Ross Morrison McGill and Helen Woodley. Sounds like a fantastic read. Pretend Schools and Section 8 to 28. I think we've covered this book before, haven't we? I think we were looking at doing a show on this, weren't we?
I think so. At some stage, I'd like to have I'd like to build up to that one and have a couple of guests on.
But Catherine Lee, that's now released. It was released on the 3rd book. It's called Pretended, which looks great. If you, Tom has already put a couple of tweets out this week about joining the team at Teacher Talk Radio. We're always looking for new presenters to come and join us. And there's some great shows coming up. We've got Nick Linley, who's doing the Wednesday Late Show every other week, starting on the 22nd of Feb. And Sunday is a busy day for Teacher Talk Radio. This morning, our weekly review with a show with Tom, Ben, and Nathan. And Leanne, sorry. Crumbling buildings, strikes in Wales, abusive language in our classrooms. Maybe there's some link there with what we were doing. Next week, Brent's got a debut. He's really kind of working the airways. So what show is that for?
That's the weekly review. So I'll be on there with the weekly review next week, and then obviously we'll have our show after that as well. So next Sunday is my Teacher Talk Radio day. Maud's on later on, the Twilight Show, and Tom's got a really good show tomorrow lined up about parent and student responsibility. He's got some special guests for that, and that's a really good one to tune into as well. What else we got coming up? Well, you can also listen back to us, of course, where you get your podcasts. Share, like, and obviously subscribe as well to Teacher Talk Radio. Listen out for any of our shows on Twitter Space. They seem to pop up as well. Have a look at our schedule. And obviously, we're always here every Sunday for the 1 o'clock slot as well. We've got, just a big reminder, we've got the hustings coming up of the NEU. That's Daniel and Neve Sweeney and Daniel Kabidi. They're both going head to head for the single leadership of the NEU, which one of the questions I'd like to ask them was like, can you join your forces? Two are better than one. But we'll go from Kevin Mary, as many of my colleagues do point out that Kevin Mary seems to contact them more than their own mother, because they seem to send a text message every day. I mean, they are Uncle Kevin and Auntie Mary, as I like to call them affectionately. And equally, they are stepping down as the NEU leadership. I think there's going to be a lot of changes in educational leadership. And I think our current education minister seems to have lasted longer than most. So who knows how long Gillian Keegan will last for as well. Last thing then is of course keep this debate open. I think I'd like to come back to this debate. I think this is one of those that's going to be long running. I have my view on it, and I hate to admit then, if it is true that our young people are becoming more violent, because I don't like to think that they are. It is a pretty sad sort of state of affairs. But I think coming from beyond this, it would be a question I would like to ask some politicians. And I think that's what I'm going to write my letter to my MP on this afterwards, about exclusions, about violence in schools, about post-COVID. I think there's a definite thread that's come out of this that has to have a follow-up of why are so many teachers leaving? Why are there so many attacks in schools? I don't think anybody centrally is capturing all this data. And I do believe, cynically speaking, it is because I think it will present a picture of schools under stress. And I think it's no point saying if things are more violent, we have to figure out why. And I suppose that's the bigger question somewhere along the line. So please follow up to this, follow up to our Twitter poll, send us a message as well if you want to keep this debate going. I think this will be a long running one we might come back to. And if you want us to answer any questions on it, then by all means, please drop us a line. So thanks for listening. And
enjoy your half term if you're about to go on half term. Hope you rested those who are coming back off half term. And I wish they'd sort the holidays out so teachers can actually meet up. And certainly if you've got younger children, I haven't seen my nieces for a while because of broken half terms and Christmases and that type of thing. So it'd be good if we can get them linked together. Anyway, have a good week, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.